This is Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing. I'm Rachel Gordon. Here we aim to make the process of writing and publishing a bit more transparent and a bit less overwhelming. Through conversations with editors and academics at all stages, from full professors to graduate students, independent scholars, and postdocs, we share stories, lessons, and helpful habits from our writing lives. We're delighted today to get to speak with Dr. Elizabeth Kagan-Arleo, who is a board-certified radiologist specializing in breast and body imaging and a professor of radiology at Weill Cornell Medical College and the editor-in-chief of the radiology journal Clinical Imaging. She is also the author of First Eat Your Frog and Other Pearls for Professional Working Mothers. So congratulations on that and welcome, Elizabeth.
Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to be here.
One of the reasons I wanted to talk with you about this first book is that you have a very full and busy career and are also the mother of 3 daughters. So you certainly didn't need to take on something else, but you still decided to write this book. And many of our listeners are perhaps at stages of their career where they don't necessarily need to write another book, but might feel called to. And I'm wondering if you can tell us about why you felt the need to write this one.
It's a good question because it's definitely a labor of love. I wanted to write books since I was a child. I found a journal from when I was in second grade and I had written I want to write a book. And I think part of that is my father, in a first career, he published 2 novels. So that was also always something inspiring to me. Because of this, I participated in something called National Novel Writing Month, NaNoWriMo, which is in November of each year. And it's this online community. I'm sure many people listening to this podcast have heard of it. But the idea is during the course of November to write a 50,000 word novel, just a draft, just get it out there, which if you do the math, breaks down to 1,667 words a day. And I love to read fiction, but writing fiction is not my strength. But I like the idea of a streak and an exercise. So I did it for writing a family history. And I'm so glad I did because I got so much valuable family history before while it was still here. And then finally, in the midst of the chaos of COVID, in that first dead of winter of COVID, from 2020 moving into 2021 was such a challenging time for the whole world. And I think especially for women in the sandwich generation, as I am and many are, taking care of both elderly parents and children who are now at home. And I just felt so chaotic in my brain that I needed to have I needed clarity as to what were the most important things and principles and sort of taking stock of where I was in my life. And I've always loved this quotation by the writer David McCullough. And he wrote, quote, "Writing is thinking. To write well is to think clearly. That's why it's so hard." And I needed to think clearly at that time. And writing was my process for doing it. And so I decided to put the time that I was not commuting into work in person to writing.
Yeah. So I'm curious with the family history, was that something you wanted to do something with, or is it just sort of to give your children?
It was at a time when we had our 2 girls. Our girls are now 17, 13, and 8. And as when we had the first 2, and I felt like it was something I wanted to give to them. And so it was a very clear structure. It was maternal side, and it had a very clear structure. And then I did just first person interviews, and it ended up being way more than 50,000 words in the end. But it's just for our family, so I didn't let the perfect be the enemy of the good, and It was great, and it actually really helped my academic writing as well because from that I learned okay, I can knock out 1,600 words or really 1,000 words an hour. And that just having done that for so many days in a row really changed how efficiently I am able to write. I didn't do it for that reason, but that was a secondary positive side effect.
Yeah. The writing of this book, First Eat Your Frog, is very clear and accessible and personal. And I'm guessing it's probably unlike academic writing you do or edit for the journal. How did you figure out how to do this? Did you have models, or was it difficult for you to write this way and personally?
Yes, it's such a good question. Actually, the only way I know how to write for the past, 20 years of my life is academic writing. And as I mentor medical students and residents who are writing academic papers, I always tell them, like, this doesn't need to be prize-winning, English literature. This just needs to be clear and logical. And in a scientific paper for original research is a very clear outline. It follows what's called like the IMRAD for scientific research. I model the introduction, the materials and methods, the results, and the discussion. And it's very structured. And so that structure, that's what I know how to write. And I applied it to writing this way too. And so it does come across as, I hope, and I'm glad to hear, like clear and organized and logical because I'm following that medical model.
Mm.
To write personally, yes, that was very challenging. I mean, it was not challenging in that I was doing it for like personal clarity. And yet I got to a certain point when the book was accepted for publication. I was working with the editor that I was like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm putting all this out here. I felt quite vulnerable about it. And then I returned to one of my favorite writers is Brene Brown, and she's written so many fabulous books, one of which is called Dare to Lead. And she talks about the importance of vulnerability in leadership. And I think that only becomes possible when you get a little bit more senior, as I have now. And so remembering that and how other role models and writers, before me being vulnerable, it had such an impact, I was able to then, continue going forward. But I did have a couple of moments of thinking about it. Yeah, it's quite vulnerable to put yourself out that way.
Mm. The book begins with a moment of feeling overwhelmed. So you've kind of referred to this, but it made me wonder how you moved from that overwhelmed kind of feeling to writing about it. As you write, you want to help with the overwhelm by putting this book out there. So what moved you from just feeling all of that stress to sort of thinking about how can I help others with it?
Well, again, for me, the David McCullough, writing is thinking, to write well is to think clearly. That's why it's so hard. And I guess what finally put me over the edge is like, why now? When did I start now? That first winter of COVID, I'm a practicing radiologist, so specializing in women's imaging. So our volumes were so way down because non-essential screening mammography was not being done. And so a lot of us in academia were trying to figure out how we can add value to our department, our institution. And I was just doing as many lectures as possible so I could be involved educationally, which is of course really needed for our residents always. And a lot of the talks I've been asked to give, because it's my area of interest, were non-interpretive skills, including for women in medicine, women in radiology, underrepresented minorities applying to medical school. And everyone's at home and everyone's in close quarters. So my eldest daughter at the time, Sophia, she was 12, and she heard me giving a similar lecture to different groups, and she's like, why don't you write that into a book? And I said, well, what would it be about? And she said, well, everything you've learned since you first had me, and how you do it both as working and as a mother. And I thought, you know what? If not now, when?
Mhm. Yeah. It sounds like maybe COVID was a time when, in a way, you might have had more time. But I was going to ask how you practically made time to write this book, considering there's probably a lot of other things in your career and life you have to do. Was it early morning, or how did you fit it in?
Even though I'm a physician and I'm a runner, I'm not a morning person. So, I tried for a while to make a habit of getting up early, and I'd rather sleep. So I'm more of a night owl. So I would often, right after I got my three girls to sleep, that was, a time that I naturally anyway just usually read. So I was adding writing, and I toggled back and forth between, was I going to write for a certain amount of time, or was I going to write for a certain word count? And depending on the day and stage of whatever, I tried to set stretch but realistic goals, and then loosely beat them. And if I wasn't, then sort of just reevaluating. But trying to make, again, like a regular, like modeled after NaNoWriMo, like a daily writing habit in some way. Although not every day looked the same, but I'd sort of have a plan and then try to adapt. And I eventually got it done.
For many of our guests, having people read our work is super important, and can sometimes be very encouraging, depending on the feedback you're getting. Was that something you were doing during the book?
Not during the initial writing. because I didn't even tell anyone that I was writing a book because I had, I guess, such imposter syndrome that people were like, "What are you doing? Like, you can't." I just it was like a private passion project for me till I got through the first draft, and then as I started editing it, and I was still giving these sort of lectures, it just sort of came up naturally. I mentioned to my colleagues, and they were interested in reading it, and I was like, "Really?" And so a couple of my colleagues read some beta chapters and gave me feedback. It was very helpful. I followed an amazing book. I think this is like a later question, but a shout out now to a book by author Kelly Notaris, who wrote a book called Writing the Book That You Were Born to Write. I wrote it down the correct title. Kelly Notaris, Notaris. And she, in there, she outlines, and it's for writing nonfiction, also like a very rigorous self-editing process that you can go through after you've written an initial draft. And I followed that like several rounds over for myself.
Yeah. The title of this book seems like a big part of the message you're sending. Can you explain it?
Yes. So the title comes from a quotation attributed to Mark Twain, who said, "If it's your job to eat a frog, then it's best to eat it first in the morning. If it's your job to eat two frogs, it's best to start with the large one." And I've had this quotation hanging in my office wall for years because it reminds me, whenever I come in first thing in the morning or the week to do the most important thing or the thing I'm most likely to procrastinate on as early as possible in the day or week or month, whatever time period I'm dealing with. And I feel like the reason I have it there is it really it sets you up for success. Like, number one, come what may, like the most important thing has been taken care of. And also it really like lessens your mental load because instead of like thinking about it and worrying about it, getting it done, you get it done and then you can use all that mental bandwidth for something else. So the example I like as a breast temperature, the example I like to give is I never miss a chance to reinforce the American College of Radiology recommendation for annual screening mammography starting at 40 for women of average risk. And I'm over 40 now, and yet screening could be anxiety provoking even for a breast temperature like myself. So I, try to eat my frog and schedule my annual screening mammogram as early as possible in the month, the week, the day that I'm having it done. So I can, set myself up for success by taking care of myself physically and, lessen my mental load by taking care of it, as early as possible. And then instead of all that mental bandwidth spent worrying about it, I can direct it elsewhere.
Mm. Some of our guests have kind of generously shared the reality about this difference between what they're envisioning their book will be versus kind of the reality. And I don't know if you had that experience, but did you have thoughts in advance of what the book would be versus, what you found out putting a book out there would actually mean or be?
It's such a good question. I feel like overall, the experience exceeded my expectations. The process I enjoyed more than I thought. Like the depth and the breadth of learning was just so intellectually satisfying for me, and just the whole journey. And I thought maybe it was going to be like a one and done thing, and I sort of but I've just enjoyed the journey and the process that I really hope to do it. And I am going to do it again, which I can talk about. And I guess another thing that I never imagined is I never expected so many people to come up to me and say, like, your book changed my life.
Hmm.
And that is just amazing because I hope to have that experience a positive impact with my patients one-on-one. And I feel like it's very clear to me that that's my mission professionally, but I can at period, and I can only do that one-on-one at one time. And here, the book written can be out there and helping other people, even if I'm not with them, and that's very gratifying.
Yeah. And it does seem, I don't know if I guess I thought of the book as kind of in the self-help category, which does seem like it, especially, I think, maybe has that potential to help and really change people's lives. Is that a area that you think you would continue to write more books in?
Possibly. I actually have a second book coming out in October, totally different genre and target audience, but it's a children's book, and the target audience are children ages 12 to 36 months. And the book is called Bye Bye Mama's Milk. And
Hmm.
it's a compassionate transition for mother and child as they conclude their nursing journey together. And it's hopefully going to be the first in what my agent and I are called the Bye Bye series. Bye Bye Mama's Milk, then Bye Bye Baba, Bye Bye Binky, referring to Passover, and maybe Bye Bye Blanky or Orchid.
Mhm.
But this comes, I guess, from again, my personal experience working with being with, a mother with my girls. And what I found is that at each time that this was relevant, that the market on toilet training books is really inundated. And yet, in Western culture in major cities in New York, or there's not that much talked about in terms of, if you're nursing after, say, 6 or 12 months, even though the American Academy of Pediatrics recommends nursing to at least till 6 months, and as long as mutually, at least, or considering to 1 year, and then as long as it's mutually agreed upon. So yeah, that's what this book is about. So I'm excited for that to come out, and hopefully the rest of the series.
Yeah, that does sound exciting. Some of our guests have talked about this process of finding an agent. It's very mysterious to many writers, especially academics. How did you figure out how to do this?
I learned first by failure. Many, many, many months of writing queries and cold emailing, and majority of the time getting no response, and sometimes getting some response when I was happy to get a response, even if it was a rejection, especially rejection that gave me some constructive feedback, because then I would revamp whatever my query was and go at it again. And
Mhm.
I think perseverance is very important in this journey. And then eventually a friend listening to me talk about this said, well, why don't you tap into your college alumni network to try to find a literary agent? And within a week, I had, 3 people I was talking to. And by the end of the month, I signed with my amazing literary agent, Peter Garland, who I've learned so much from. And I'm so grateful to have met him and to work with him.
That's great. Was that literally listeners might wonder, should they get in touch with their sort of alumni association and kinda ask if there's like a filter for that or something in the bank of alumni, or how did you go about that?
I literally just, Googled like alumni network, and I never used it before because I'm in medicine. So like, I never had to look for a job. I was going to the residency and fellowship and then staying on this hub. So that whole world was new too. I didn't understand that. I mean, I don't know if it's naive, or I just, I thought you could, and you can, hopefully, you never know. Like, I went through a meticulous, methodical process of cold emailing people, and that didn't work. Then like, reach out to natural connections that you have. I think that because people want to, if you have a connection, even more so, people want to help you.
It doesn't hurt to ask politely is the title of one of your chapters, which intrigued me, maybe because it kinda hit close to home. I realized it took me sort of a long time to realize how much sort of being just kinda nice and friendly and respectful really goes a super long way. Can you tell us about what this advice is based on, or why there's a chapter about this?
This is another life lesson that I learned from my eldest daughter, Sophia, as well. This came from when our children are often our greatest teachers. And I've learned from all 3 of my children. When Sophia was about 5 years old, we were walking in Manhattan, and it was mid-May. And I talk about this in the book. I don't think I ate a lychee until I was like in medical school, but we had a friend from Costa Rica who introduced us to them. And early in or mid-May, they sort of start coming up with the fruit vendors in New York City. And so it was early May, and Sophia was asking little 5-year-old every single fruit stand, excuse me, do you have any lychees? Do you have any lychees? And after the third time, I said, sweetie, it must be too early in the season. Like, we can check back next month. And again, perseverance. Like, she insisted on asking every single fruit stand until we were practically in the East River. And finally, one of the men said, yes, how many pounds would you like? And she turned to me and she said, see, it doesn't hurt to ask. And I thought, you know what? She's absolutely right. Because
Mhm.
I think the lesson from this is, at that level and at a more meta level, like, if you don't ask, the answer is no. Like, whatever you want, that you're not going to get it. If you do ask, the worst you can hear is no, and you might hear yes. And like, I think in Western society, maybe beyond, like, we're just socialized not necessarily to ask for what we want, more to be people pleasers. And so I think it's not easy. I can only speak to being, a woman here, to ask. And if you keep that in mind, you gotta ask, or you're not gonna get what you need or want. And the politely part I added on because I still think we're living and working in a time where still it's a very fine line for women in the workplace where if you don't necessarily speak up about your achievements, you may be passed up for promotion. But if you speak too loudly about things, like then you may be seen as too assertive or aggressive and not liked for that way. So I think like thinking about that throughout my career and that fine line, I feel like tangentially they're related because then I sort of added to, it doesn't hurt to ask, added politely, because how can you go wrong with politely? And I feel like we can all use a lot more respect and consideration in the world we live in. And if you're going to ask if you do it politely, then again, you might hear no, but you could hear yes. And it's hard to argue with being polite and respectful.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's another chapter title that's called Have a Growth Mindset, which I feel like is something I've heard more in recent years. What does this mean to you?
Yes. I didn't hear about a growth mindset until my daughter's, again, Sophia was in third grade and she came home from school with this piece of paper to hang on her bulletin board that had two faces facing each other. And it had fixed mindset and growth mindset. Growth mindset attributed to Carol Dweck, who's a Stanford psychologist. And the meaning of a growth mindset is thinking and believing that our abilities really can be developed by hard work and learning, compared with like a fixed mindset, like I'm not good at math and I'm not going to be good at math. Like no, I'm not good at math yet. And I can develop my ability and learn to study. So I include this because I think not having a growth mindset can very much be, hurtful personally and professionally. That's been my experience. And so I think just having really clarity behind having a growth mindset, and if you catch yourself or others in a fixed mindset, just sort of first recognize it and then pause and try to have a more growth mindset reframe so that you can grow and do the things you want to do and have a more full life.
Yeah. I mean, about that point of growing and doing sort of the things that you want to do, I'm just thinking in terms of career trajectory, was this writing this kind of book, which seems like something that you had wanted to do, did you feel earlier that this was the kind of book you needed to wait until a certain time in your career, or even at this point, does it feel like if you were advising a sort of earlier stage med school professors, is the self-help book sort of category something that could be a problem earlier in the career to write?
It's such a good question. I think I was at right time in the right place. A lot of things came together senior enough to be able to talk about my experiences, and having had, experiences and taken risks and hit challenges. And also, I guess, had the time to reflect on it. So I think it's pretty clear. It's sort of like a mid, I don't know, a mid to senior. It's like a mid career, and I've gotten to a certain point, and this is what I've learned in the past 15 years when I wrote the book. Hopefully I'm still learning, but this is sort of like where I'm at right now. It's pretty
Yeah.
open, I hope, in that. And also hopefully clear that, what I've learned or my ways of doing things, not necessarily, I don't have the one answer. What works for me isn't gonna work for everyone. But I know from, reading a lot of nonfiction and talking to mentors and sponsors that sometimes just hearing someone's individual personal story, even if there's just one small something in it that resonates with you, can have a really big impact. And I hope that there's at least something big or small in my book that resonates with readers.
Yeah. There's two questions that we ask all guests, and one is, what is something you wish you had known early in your career about writing or publishing?
I wish I knew that you needed a quote platform. I didn't even know what a platform was. Now I'm probably dating myself. I'm 47, almost 48, but it seems like, when I wrote this book in 2021 and got it published in 2023, by that point, it was like, if you are not a celebrity, you need to have some sort of online platform or presence because, the major publishing houses, they don't want to make an investment if they don't know they're going to understandably get a return. And so, I wouldn't have done anything differently. I am who I am and I'm happy with what I'm doing. But it took me a number of months into that to understand that. And whereas I'm well known in my, relatively well known in my field of radiology and women in radiology, that's its own little niche. So I think just that awareness and the importance of having a platform, whatever exactly that means in your field or beyond, is really important. I guess it was, again, naive not to know that, but that's something I learned in the process.
Yeah, I mean, many of our guests are like our generation, even younger, we feel that same way. But I guess to counter that, I noticed some people really try to do a lot to publicize or to get the book out there in other ways, just kind of through their networks. Is that something you also did, or I don't know if you had the time to do that?
Yes, I got advice from a sort of a mom friend through my kids' school who's also a writer and is like a year or two ahead of me in publishing her book. And she gave me the great advice to, if possible, to retain a publicist. And, as many things like that's clearly platform and publicity is not my area of expertise. And so having someone whose expertise it was very helpful. And I was very concerned about, doing publicity in a manner that, kosher with my hospital and institution. So I went to our Department of External Affairs, which I'd worked with for, medical media coverage, and asked for some recommendations. And I'm so grateful to Sarah Smith, who's the head of External Affairs, who pointed me to my wonderful publicist, Justin Goldstein of PR 73. So we continued to work together, and I'm looking forward to restarting working to do publicity for Bye Bye Mama's Milk. I've learned so much from him too, like so much. So,
like what kinds of things?
I mean, from the small, like even though he's younger than I am, sometimes he'll just pick up the phone and call for a quick question. It's like so much greater efficiency. We don't use the phone anymore. Something like maybe banal or not banal like that. To also how to field reporters' questions and deal with live TV interviews, and how to modulate your answers depending on what media you're working on, and how to write a pitch for so much.
Yeah, I know the hiring publicist is something that I feel like a lot of writers are really considering or doing now. And another question we ask is about a writing practice or habit that works for you.
I have tried, circling back to platform, to write or post regularly on LinkedIn, and sometimes set goals I've moved away from Twitter, which was really big in the radiology community, or X. So I've tried to set a certain number of times I post per week or month. I don't necessarily achieve that. And when I'm not actively working on a book, I think my habit is not writing, but it's more reading. Like I'm very rigorous about, maybe it doesn't sound like very much to others, but if you're also working full time and have kids, I try at the bare minimum to read a nonfiction book and one fiction, one nonfiction book each month. And I keep a list of that. And so I think my habit is reading, which I think is good for germinating for ideas for writing.
Agreed. Well, thank you so much, Elizabeth. It was really fun to get to talk with you.
It was a pleasure to speak with you too. And thank you very much for the opportunity. And I'm glad to meet you.
Thanks for listening to Writing It, the podcast about academics and writing, sponsored by the Center for Jewish Studies at the University of Florida. Visit our podcast description to find out how to contact us and send us your questions about academic writing and publishing. Follow us on social media at Writing It Pod and subscribe to us so you never miss an episode.